Hi, Ismail. Great to have you back.
Hello, great to be here.
I hope you're keeping well.
Doing okay, doing all right. Yeah, I should see I got my books and everything like you do, so I never get bored.
Right. Okay, Ismail, for the readers' benefit, I'm going to introduce you. You're a musician, you're a storyteller and author with an interest in the mythologies and legendary personalities of the past, right? For our series, we are doing Forgotten Cultures and Histories, and today we're going to touch upon Manichaeism, the world's original universal faith, which I've heard a lot of websites describing it. Right? I think once this faith was practiced literally from the Pacific to the Atlantic Ocean, right? From the 3rd century AD to the Middle Ages. And perhaps no religion was so oppressed or harassed and continuously stamped out over the centuries like the religion of money was, money being the prophet. Yet, despite the extermination of this faith, it's practically extinct now. It actually influenced many of the ideologies that oppressed it. That was something fascinating to learn about it.
Yeah.
So tell me, what threat did it present to the empires of that time, and why was it so oppressed and harassed? Over to you, Ismail.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question to start with, and let me turn on original to my technology stuff. That's a good question to start with, and maybe that we can look just a few minutes at the origins and the basic beliefs of Manichaeism. Mani was born in the 3rd century, 216 AD, they say he was born. And this was a time in the Middle East when, well, for 2 centuries before that, 3 centuries before, there was a lot of change going on. New reformers in religion were coming on. Actually, Jesus and John the Baptist were considered reformers in Judaism. There was a group of religions known as the Gnostic religions that had a different take on the creation of the world. There was a lot going on. There was a lot of resentment toward the Roman Empire. And when Mani was born, he was born in Iraq, in what is now near Babylon, now Iraq. Okay, then it was called Babylon. Ctesiphon was the city. And at that time, the two great powers that were vying for power and using the Fertile Crescent area, the Middle East, as a battleground, was Rome and Persia, the superpowers of the time. They were fighting wars. One was winning, one was losing. It was going back, and this continued for centuries, actually. And so in Mani's time, a lot of people were looking at new views and the way to look to explain this, in the forms of religion, as all human beings do, So Mani was born at that time. He was born in this atmosphere. He was part of the Elkasites, which was a group. Today they still survive. They're called the Mandaeans. They're found in Iraq. Well, they've been persecuted recently, of course, too. But they were followers. Some people call them followers of John the Baptist. So they acknowledge Jesus, but their main focus is John the Baptist, and they believe that they're the most ancient religion, and all the prophets had the same message like that. So he came from that, but he began to become upset with the structure of their church and the structure of the hierarchy. And he became very frustrated. And when he was young, he supposedly went down to the river, maybe the Tigris or Euphrates, and he looked at it in the river and he saw his reflection. And supposedly the reflection spoke to him. It didn't come in the form of an angel or anything. It was his own reflection speaking, And he was inspired then. He received another one of these revelations later when he got older, and he was actually commanded to go, or he commanded himself, to go and learn and spread this message, which was a message of not that one God is in control of everything, but that it was a dualism, that there was God and there was evil, okay? There was light and there was darkness, and they were in constant conflict. This he drew possibly from Zoroastrian sources, and the Gnostics had this battle thing too, but he took it out and he actually said, what makes Manichaeism unique is that it's definitely, there's good and evil, and the two are not part of one. One does not control the other, they continually fight. And this is reflected in our lives, in our own, every day, everything we do is basically a contest between two things. And I think every religion acknowledges that as well. So he traveled around his part of the known world. He went to India, traveled throughout Persia. He went to Central Asia. He went all over, and he came back, and he was educated because he was educated in being a doctor. He was a medical doctor, and he was a painter and a writer besides. So he came back and he started writing. He was of Persian background. He lived in Iraq, but he wrote in Aramaic as well. And he started writing his books. And then he started to attract followers after he traveled. And when I say first universal religion, he stated in there that the universal truth, light, the God of light, the goodness, permeates everything. And all religions, all the religious scriptures have the light in them, and they all agree on the same thing. But religion, organized religion, the scriptures, because they're created by man, which is also part darkness, also can be corrupt. Churches can be corrupt. Religions and political ideologies be corrupt. So there it is, no matter what. It gets a little pessimistic for a lot of people sometimes. It gets a little negative. But if you think about it, he's got a point. I mean, it's really, you cannot argue that, you know.
Yes.
So he came back.
Great point. He's got a great point.
Yeah. So he came back and he started to attract followers. And they became very enamored with him. And he attracted followers very quickly. Remember, we're living in this time between Rome and Persia, destroying the Fertile Crescent region. It was terrible. The armies were just horrible. There was no Geneva Convention in those days, right? So there were no rights. So in this, people sought refuge in this ideology. A new shah, a new dynasty came in Persia. Remember also the state religion at the time was Zoroastrianism, and Persia made it a state religion. Normally they were very tolerant, like Cyrus the Great centuries before, but by now it was becoming a state religion. There was another form of it, Zurvanism. I mention these names, it's just too much to go into detail. And the priesthood became very powerful. Okay, remember what he thought of priesthoods. He left his own religion for that reason. So this new Shah, Shapur the First, the founder of the Sasanian dynasty, took a liking to him. Supposedly the story was that Shapur was sick. Mani, being a doctor, cured him. And after that, he brought him into his court and he allowed him to preach his religion. So he attracted many, many followers. He had a very devout following, a loyal following. And what happened after that was that Shapur went on. Shapur was conquering. He defeated the Romans in a battle. And the only Roman emperor ever to be taken captive and died in captivity, the Emperor Valerian, Shapur defeated him in battle somewhere in Iraq or Syria. I forgot where it was. And you can see statues to this day of Valerian kneeling while Shapur is on a horse, or they have him like chained like a dog. And of course, when asked about it, Mani didn't approve of this because he was a pacifist. He didn't believe in the war. So Shapur was like, okay, you stay there and I'll stay here. We're going to have this separate, he was starting to be worried. All this time, the Zoroastrian, the Magi, the priests were becoming very annoyed with Mani now because he was gaining so many followers. So Shapur dies. Another Hormazd comes to power. He tolerated Mani but wasn't interested in the religion. And then finally, this Bahram I became the new Shah of Iran Shah, this Persian Empire now, as it was called at the time, which was huge. And the Zoroastrian priests just decided they couldn't take it anymore. And he's getting too popular. So very much like Jesus, they called him to account. They called blasphemy, heresy, and they put him in prison. Mani, supposedly, he died. He spent about a month or two in prison. He died in prison. Bahram wanted to execute him. The story goes, or the believers say, the followers say in their books, that he died in prison on the day that Bahram sent the executioner. And he was robbed of it. So Mani's soul, remember, this is all about the body and the soul. The body died. The soul went to heaven. He was freed. He was liberated. And to his followers, that was a wonderful thing, right? Like the resurrection of Christ. So what Bahram did was he was so frustrated, he was so angry, he cut Mani's body in half, stuffed it with straw, and had the two halves hung on the city gates. But by now, he was so angry, the Magi was so upset that they did this because he had so many followers. And this is where the name comes from. Manichaean is the Greek version. Manichaeis is the Greek pronunciation of the Aramaic Manichai. Mani lives.
Oh. Right.
See, Manichai in
Hebrew.
Aramaic, or also I believe in Arabic, in Hebrew too, Hai is life. So in the Semitic languages, Manichai. So they became Manichai. The Greeks called them Manichaeans. That's how it came. His followers then spread everywhere. They did exactly what he did. He went to seek knowledge. He taught to seek knowledge. They did the same. And the religion became so popular, it was actually practiced on the shores of the Pacific in China, all the way to France in during the Roman Empire on the shores of the Atlantic. So it was a universal faith that its basic doctrine was that everything has got good and evil in it, everything's got light and dark, and all religions have elements of universal truth within them. They're all true. He mentions Buddha, he mentions Zoroaster, he even mentions Hermes, the Greek personality there. He mentions a lot of these things, and it's all true. So that's basically the first religion that announced that. Other religions followed. Centuries later, Islam came around. In fact, kind of as a reaction to this constant bickering going on between Persia and Rome, and the peoples of the First Fertile Crescent actually, at that time, accepted the Arab Muslim rule because they tolerated them at the time. It would change in 200 years, but at the time they did, and they acknowledged these religions. The Sabaeans are one of the people in the book in the Quran, but I don't know what happened to Manichaeism after that. It then began to be it was persecuted. Every country it went to, it was persecuted. It was persecuted in China. It was persecuted in Europe, in the Roman Empire. It was persecuted in India. Everywhere, it had to be stamped out.
Why?
And why? That's the good question. Why? My personal feeling is that it posed a threat to theocracies and monarchs of the day. At that time, religion commanded what a people were, what a nation was. They had state religions. Rome created Christianity, and then became a state religion. In response to what the Persians did, being Zoroastrianism, they created a state religion. It's to unify the empire, right? So what happened with Manichaeism was that it was seen as a threat. And the threat was in the dualism. If there is not one God in full control, all-knowing and all-powerful, if he can't control the universe, the fact that God can't do it, a king can't do it. And they saw that as a threat. I really believe they saw that as a threat. That's my personal belief in that, and there are a few books and documents to back that up. In most religions, there is one high God that oversees everything. Even religions like Hinduism acknowledge, Rama or Vishnu is the high, and then there's hierarchy going below that. There's in monotheism, of course, Abrahamism. There's God, Yahweh, Allah, Elohe, Jehovah. He's one entity in full control. But Mani counter that. Even Zoroastrianism acknowledges Ahura Mazda and Ahriman, good and evil, and they are in conflict. But Ahura Mazda's got the edge. Mani is saying, no, if you look at our lives, if you look at everything around you, everything has got beauty in it and it's got ugliness. Everything's got good and it's got bad. Health and sickness, everything. No matter what it is, even those institutions that claim to speak for it, and he was very critical of religious institutions in that way. So this, I feel, was a threat. The emperors of the time felt that they were being threatened by this. No, we have to have one king of the universe. We have to have one king of the empire. This is dangerous to say, well, you're counterbalanced and you're fighting a war and all this thing. No, you can't be defeated. That's no way you can be defeated. And Mani doesn't say that the God of light is defeated. He is saying that he's fighting the battle, and he will eventually, in the end, win, because the body is created of the devil. By the devil, the soul is created by God, and the soul escapes from the prison. Of course, it sounds very pessimistic, but if you think about it in the sense of our daily lives, it makes a lot of sense.
It does.
And I'm not using any scientific anything to back any of this up, because it's all, religious stuff it's conjecture. But this theory of, I saw a video some few years back about something called in the universe called dark matter. I often fool around them and said dark matter, but they're talking about stars and how they are things of light, and actually this dark matter kind of eats at them and takes it away, and that's how a star dies. I'm not saying it's the same thing, but it's very similar to that. It's a fact that that happens. So this idea that darkness consumes light and eats it and destroys it is basically, we see this. It may be very ancient. It may be Babylonian. It may be an ancient theory. There's no question. But this is what Manichaeism was, and this posed a threat, I believe, to the emperors and kings of monarchs who were divinely ordained and blessed by the church and by the existing religion of these countries. And no, can't have that. And it was wiped out. I mean, you can read the history of it. It was just disappeared. Manichaeism was very, very popular, interestingly, in the Uyghur, Xinjiang, China, where the Uyghurs live now, who were predominantly Muslim. It was very popular there. It was a center. And we still have some books and some fragments of parchment written there in these various languages. That many languages were used. I mean, they wrote in Persian, they wrote in Chagatai, Turkish, they wrote it in a bunch of languages, and that was very popular there. It became very popular. It was very popular also in North Africa. The Arians were a Christian group that were not in sync with the Nicene Church of Constantinople. They didn't believe that Jesus was born divine. He became divine, as opposed to the Nicene, what we know of Christianity today, that Jesus was already divine. So they differed with that. That also was a church that disappeared, but that was very popular in North Africa as well. Later on, in another program, we're going to talk about the Bogomils of the Balkans and the Cathars of southern France. It also spread there into Europe as well. So all these places. And what I find ironic is that a lot of these places that were very, very heavily Manichaean, they converted to Islam. And very later on, their Islam was usually very tolerant and very inclusive. It was very nonchalant. And that's an interesting thing. And this happened, of course, the Islamic conquest came at the time when a lot of this Roman and Persian fighting was going on, and so they just sought that for the moment to get out of it. So it's a very interesting thing. There's no very interesting phenomenon, but it was persecuted terribly, in fact. And no, it doesn't exist. There's a Manichaean church today, but it's recreated now. In the past 50 years or something, somebody looked at it and they say, okay, I'm going to make a church, but it didn't exist. It lasted until about 1400s. It's in the United States. There's a church. I see it online. They post some writing. I think it's very helpful. They have a lot of things. They're very good. Very small. It's very tiny. It's an offshoot church. They created it and they base it on Mani's teachings. They do it. It's very nice. But it's not an extension of what was. I think they lasted in China till about the 1500s, and then it died. Interesting.
Considering that the influence of Manichaeism had on other, as you say, that it was at the crux of all this, these ideas clashing with each other, don't you think it has actually survived? Because the little that you read of Manichaeism, it has a lot of similarities with Buddhism. It has a lot of similarities with even Islam, because in Islam there's a concept of nur, light, right?
The concept of light, absolutely, right? Yes.
So
there's a whole chapter.
Say they borrowed because again the clash of ideas, and as happens, whether it's a revolution or you're divinely inspired, you tend to take from ideas which are kind of going around. It has a lot of similarities with Christianity as well. Christianity also, good and evil. And the resurrection, as you said, the body, I think it has a lot of similarities with Hinduism as well, because again, they believe that the body is, evil, and they go through all those trials and everything, and eventually the Atma has to be freed from all the titles and everything. So I'd say it has kind of survived.
Yeah, it also left a great influence on Christianity through the person of Augustine, Saint Augustine. We were speaking about North Africa before. He was a Manichaean. He was a Manichaean, and then later he spoke against it and he argued for Christianity. And if you read the writings of Augustine, you'll find this is where this idea of light and dark, good and evil really come to play in Christianity. It really gives essence to that and lends it to the self, to the old Jesus story and the whole Christian narrative. It really lends itself to that. And it's fascinating to see that he spoke against it and he was a critic of it, but yet his writing, he took so much of it and gave that to Christianity. So this whole thing of, you know, Jesus being light and against darkness is you can say that Augustine, Saint Augustine, contributed that. And
kind of preserved Mani's thoughts, kind of.
Yeah, it really did. It really influenced that, you know. And also, we're speaking about Islam and these places that converted to Islam. That may have been totally political, but it also had something to do with what they were before. You know, it's people convert to something if there's usually something there that they recognize in that. And I think that these were, especially in the outlying areas of the Islamic realm, like the Xinjiang, which was way up in China, and then later in the Balkans, which Islam didn't get there till the Ottomans. It wasn't the Arabs. So we talk about 14th century, and the persecution that the former followers of this ideology were facing, I think they surrendered to Islam because it was just the simple thing that you have to state that you're a Muslim and you do what you want anyway. It wasn't as enforced in these places anyway. It was in other places, but not there. And so they were able to maintain that. They saw the austerity and again, they recognized the light and dark, the good and evil. We have to make the world a better place, you know, while we're here, and then escape and get out of it, you know. And they just found it simplest, and so that may be a reason why too, you know. I attended a talk once, way back, late '80s. I was much younger, and it was given by a professor named Cyrus Glasse, and I think he's Belgian, and he had a talk called it was entitled the Once and Future Religion, and he spoke about Zoroastrianism and the basics of that, and he went into detail about Manichaeism as well and its relation to that, and he gave the examples of how it survived in the Abrahamic faiths, you know, how it survived in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Cyrus the Great invaded, of course, in many centuries BC, the Middle East. He liberated the Hebrews from their Babylonian captivity. He rebuilt their temple. He established, you know, tolerance for all religions. The Persian emperor, Cyrus the Great. And after that, you see,
hence the Great.
And hence the Great. He was great. He was great, no question. And it's interesting that you see in Judaism, you don't see the concept of life after death before him. You don't see angels. You don't see levels of heaven. Okay, you have this in Islam too, and in Christianity. 7 levels of heaven, 7 levels of hell, and this and that. Ranks of different types of angels, different types of... You don't really see that in the ancient Hebrew religion, but you see it after contact with Cyrus the Great. So it's you see that influence there, you know, and then that went on to stimulate Judaism, Christianity, and eventually Islam as well. But Mani played a very important role because, again, you see this in all these religions as well. This light and dark thing is so prevalent. It's so prevalent. I mean, it's just, and the battle for the final battle between good and evil, which comes out of Zoroastrianism too. But you see these descriptions, and even in the Quran, and they're so, you know, for those people who believe that it's divinely inspired, as any religious person, that's fine. It comes through, but it's so very Persian in element. The Book of Revelations in the Bible, you read that, it's like something out of a Persian text, you know. And Mani, I guess, you know, he really imbued this stuff, and he really saw it. So his message comes off at first as being very pessimistic and negative. There's no question about it. This stinks. This life is horrible. This flesh is bad, you know. But now free me so the soul can go out, you know. But he did attract a lot of followers. He also taught kindness, charity. Manichaeans were vegetarians, and they had their own hierarchy within the society as well. The people known as the elect
Yes.
They were the ones who dedicated themselves, and they became vegetarians. But common people could follow it too, and they could still maintain and eat what they want. And that, there's this whole thing about foods.
I think
There's certain,
celibacy was practiced too.
yeah, they did practice celibacy among the elect, but not among the common people. And you have this, also have this today in the Islamic tradition. In Islamic country, you have the Sufism. You have those who are members of the order, and you have the muhips or the ashiks, the ones who come who are affiliated with it, but they go home. They go home to their wives. They go home to their kids. They do what they want. They like that. So it's this similar type of thing. You see this as well in Sufism. This in the community, the communal relationship.
Ismail, don't you think this threat that they, presented to the priestly class? This is a story being, it goes through history. It keeps coming back whenever the priestly class is threatened. Remember, the priestly class in the Judaic religion was also threatened by Jesus, right?
Right, absolutely, yeah.
It's always the priestly class. I mean, I didn't know that the Zoroastrian religion had actually, kind of persecuted Manichaeism. Nobody knew about Manichaeism, but it seems that every time there is this religion comes under the priestly class, they organize it, they ossify it, and they choose it for political motives. They feel threatened, and they try to
It's a
use the
pattern.
religion, right? So it's something
It's a pattern.
repeated.
Yeah, it's a pattern, and it's interesting that if you read his writings, Mani is one of the first also to actually acknowledge that and mention that's the reason why, because it's bound to be, because they got to be corrupt, because they cannot be perfect. Only the light is perfect. We are created beings, so we come about in light and dark, good and evil. So anything we write something, it's going to be right, light and dark, good and evil. Everything is going to be like that, and you need to recognize what is good, what is evil, what is light, what is dark. Like with the foods, the elect didn't eat meat because meat was flesh and therefore was of darkness. But there were certain vegetables and foods that were considered light, like watermelons. You talk about watermelons and dates; they have a lot of light in them or something. So it's they eat more of that. It's
a lot of similarity to
interesting.
Jainism, right? Which is also an ancient religion. A lot of similarity to Jainism.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. The Jains have that too. In fact, they wear the thing in front of their mouth so they don't inhale the insect. Yeah, they don't harm anything. That's true, and they did teach that and preach that. The Manichaeans were not, politically minded at all because of that, and that may be a reason also why they're not around, because they were just like too pacifistic and.
Like the Essenes, right?
Yeah. Yazidis have that too. They do have this concept of light and dark. Yes, they do.
So it seems that the region of the Middle East seems to have procured this kind of thinking. It keeps getting repeated, religion after religion after religion. Why is that? Why this particular reason?
I would say, and particularly Iraq, because you still have Yazidis and you still have Mandaeans, and they also acknowledge this very much. Again, I think it's because that region at the time, first of all, it's very ancient, and they've been thinking about, what's up there for a long time. They've got a lot of experience in that. I often, when I'm in conversation with some friends of mine who are they happen to be they're Christian, for example, and they're modern American Christians, and they're good people, and but they talk about that. And it's like, well, you're going to go to places like Lebanon and Israel, Palestine, or you're going to tell them that receive the word. Well, they've got the word already. They created that word. They created Christianity. I mean, come on. It's so you're standing on a street corner. That's fine. I mean, but it's who are you talking to? They wrote this stuff. They codified this stuff long ago, when your ancestors were still worshiping trees. So that's a little silly.
Hammurabi's code of law, right? He's the original.
Going back then. And if you see that famous stela, that famous sculpture, I know we have it in New York in the Museum of Natural History, and it's famous. There's Hammurabi receiving from Shamash, the god of the sun, the god of light. He's giving him the laws. Moses got it from a burning bush. Right? He got it from a burning bush. He got the insect. So there's this whole thing about light. There's Muhammad, when he ran from the cave after he supposedly got his revelation, he looked back and there was Gabriel standing on top of the mountain. He was all light, rays of light. It's all light. It's a very interesting recurring theme. Yeah, no question. But this region, I really do think that this era of competition between the Roman and Persian empires really played a role in people. You know, that was for thousands of years before the rise of Rome. There was that region was the center, cradle of civilization. You know, cradle of civilization. And when Rome and Persia came around, they were non-Semitic peoples who were fighting with each other over land that, you know, and really oppressing and hurting the people who taught them a lot. And I think the people there just decided that, hey, you know, we've got to, you know, we have to find something else. If we're not going to find it in this life, we're going to find it in the next one. And that's why so many of these religions, at the time of Jesus, I mean, we know of studying Christianity, Jesus and John the Baptist were, you know, they remembered. But there were thousands of teachers like that. There were there was so many groups you could read about it. I mean, they came and they went living up in the mountains in Syria, what is now Syria, Lebanon, you know, the Jordan. They just had their own little groups. We're still finding scrolls and papyrus hidden in jars. I find that interesting too. They find them hidden in jars in caves. Like, what were they hiding? It was considered a heresy then, you know, obviously. So they were hiding it or preserving it or something. And they're learning new things about it. Again, years ago, I saw the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it's fascinating. It's a window into, like, you know, and I think they were found by some shepherd boy in Jordan or something, or in Israel. And it's interesting. I mean, it's just interesting that who these people were and what they were doing, and they were a community. This group of people, these Gnostics, they were a community. You know, interesting stuff. Also, Egypt, by the way, Egypt had a lot of this. I think up the Nile, because people were fleeing from this violence that was going on in the Middle East, and going to Egypt. You go up the Nile, you're in Africa. Right. And so nobody would bother us there. So they went, and then you have Coptic Christianity as well, which has a lot of this in its Christianity, a lot of it. Ethiopia, yeah.
Would you say that the Middle East is blessed or cursed?
If I were Mani or a follower of Manichaeism, I would say, well, there it is.
There you go.
We're all blessed and cursed, right? I mean, we're all blessed and cursed. It's definitely blessed and cursed. What you give, you get, and what you get, you're going to give, and everything you do, you're going to find something else, and something else, something else. And I think this goes back before even the concept of you know, religion and the god or the monotheistic related religions. If you read the Epic of Gilgamesh, that's what it's about. It's about, you know, and that's also from Iraq, by the way, the story, what we call Iraq now. And that's what it is. You know, what is death? What is this? Why am I here? What should I do? And it tries to answer that question, you know. So it's an interesting thing.
Ismail, there's this new trend in India. It's kind of a revisionist history that since India is, you know, the Indic civilization, the Vedic civilization is millenniums old, 5,000 years old. The Rigveda is the oldest book in the world. Right, so they tend to say that anything that is attributed around the world now basically stemmed from there. Would you say there was a connection between Manichaeism and Hinduism at any point of time in history?
He went to India. Mani was in India, you know. He didn't. I don't. He was not received very well, from what I understand. That's one place that didn't. They basically like, get out of here, you know. But then India always has been like that. Basically, it's like, here we are. You know, we had the Rigveda for thousands of years. You know, you're not going to come and tell me anything new. It's all in there. They have so much information. But no, he was not. He was not. Accepted, and that was the first place he went to, actually. I think one of the first.
Is there a time frame to it? In whose rule did he go? Which dynasty was there? Any idea?
Yeah,
which empire was there?
He was there when he was there. When Mani was there, he was born in 216, so I guess around like 240 or something like that. He started to travel around. He died in 274 or 277 AD. That's when so with some Torah in that time 250. So you're looking at the middle of the 3rd century. And he went by ship, I believe. He traveled, you know. And that's another thing to bring up is the travel by ship. There's been connection between Iraq, what we call Iraq, and India.
and
No
India.
question about it.
Uh, the ancient dock of Lothal in Gujarat. Yeah, we
That's right.
found Mesopotamian objects and pottery, and so there was trade.
That's it. That's it. Harappa and these places, and Mohenjo-daro, there's complete cultural connections. So they were trading for a long time. So a lot of ideas were definitely going back. I mean, in the most ancient times. So there's no question, ancient Sumerians. So it was there. They were being stimulated. If you look at things I look at things from a geographical perspective. There's the Mediterranean and the influence of the Mediterranean, and there's also the Indian Ocean and what that influenced. It was another, because they didn't fly in those days. We could not go. We couldn't communicate like we do now, right? So even if you look today, if you look at Islamic culture, and you look at the mosques, the shape of mosques. From Iraq and east, the mosques have a definite Persian feel to them. The domes, the Taj Mahal in India, for example, has that type of feel. Persian. But when you go to Syria, Lebanon, and then you go to North Africa, it's got a more Roman feel. So the mosques are different. The round domes, like Byzantine churches, right? It's a different. So because these countries are on the Mediterranean, so they're going to trade with Rome and Greece. But Iraq is on the Persian Gulf, and it extends into India. So they're going to have more Eastern. And the same thing you can say with the food. If you taste Iraqi food, it's different from Syrian food. And actually, they make the same dish, but it's different. It tastes different. They use different spices. So
So they have hummus? They have hummus? Hummus?
I think they have hummus, but I think they make it differently. They do it differently. And along the Gulf, they eat curries, for example. They eat curries. They use spices like you use a lot in India. They use a lot of cumin. They use turmeric. They use that yellow one, the turmeric. They use that.
Definitely tasting different than India, because India is
and if you go to Lebanon, they say, "What's this? We use saffron. We don't want that." So it's like that kind of thing. Yeah, but we have to remember that when we talk about history, we got to think about the time and the trading routes that they had, and so it's different. It's not like I speak with a lot of people today, and they think, well, what about this? What about that? And it's like, what you're talking is if you can communicate with people like we're doing now. This was impossible. We'd have never known each other if it wasn't for this.
Shipment came in 2 or 3 years, or maybe 5 years.
So there it is. I'd like to read something, just a little short thing. By the way, I will post you. I will send you links to some books about Manichaeism, and there's a great novel I found about 10 years ago, written by the Lebanese writer Amin Maalouf.
Okay.
He wrote a book called the Gardens of Light.
Mm-hmm.
It's called the Gardens of Light by Amin Maalouf.
Okay.
And he basically it's a biographical historical novel about Mani's life, and it's very, very good. And it talks about from when he was young to the time of his death, and then afterwards. And it's a very interesting book. And when he was dying, when he was in prison and dying, supposedly there was a woman named the daughter of Athamar.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. He's got this relationship with this daughter of Athamar, very much like Mary Magdalene in Christianity. He was one of his first disciples, and it shows you the devotion that his followers had, and it wasn't anything of like this kind of monarch-like love. It was real love. They liked his message, And she writes. They have this still, it exists. So this is where Amin Maalouf got it from. Noble sun, unsparing of its warmth, and by the same action unsparing of sheltering shade. Sun, which ripens the grapes and prepares our bodies for feasting, then withdraws to let us celebrate. Sun, which turns a blind eye to our excesses and to our human follies, and returns again the following day, still equable, still generous, expecting from us neither gratitude nor submission. Noble is our sun when rising, and noble when it sets.
Beautiful.
Sun, the light. In other words, in Manichaeism, God cannot punish. God does not punish. God does not hurt anything, cannot hurt anything. Anything comes from the dark side, or the dark side of ourselves. God cannot punish. there is no concept in Manichaeism, which I find actually beautiful, that this entity that we worship, I'm not going to worship an entity. It's going to punish me if I don't do this or don't do that. If anything happens to me, it's either because I make it happen, there's the free will thing, but beyond that, if I'm born a certain way, if I'm born with a disease, if I get to if something happens, or an animal or a tree, you grow 100 apple trees, and 5 of them are defect. You're never going to get good apples from them. Why? No matter what you do, why? That's what Mani says. That's not God doing that. That's the element of darkness within all of us. It's fascinating. It's a very fascinating.
Fascinating. Ismail, I feel like listening to you for hours and hours.
I can talk for hours, but don't do that. You don't want
I would love that. Next, we are covering Cathars. You're going to be covering Cathars?
Yes, the Cathars and the Bogomils, which is an extension of Manichaeism as it was practiced in medieval Europe.
Okay.
And we'll talk about that, the reasons for that, and also we'll talk and how it was stamped out, how that was brutally stamped out, by the way. Yeah.
Thank you, Ismail. It's always a delight to have you.
It's always a pleasure to have you too.
You are a modern day guru, so I wish that this really spreads.
Modern day guru.
Yeah.
I got a dark side too. No,
excellent. Fascinating with Manichaeism. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.